the team who started Graze essentially took that same technology, that understanding of loyalty, of subscriptions, and thought about how they could apply it to a new area of business, a new sector. And the fact that technology and data is something that runs still very much in Graze's DNA. It was how it was sort of born at the beginning, and we consider it a competitive advantage still today. We didn't change what Graze was doing because we wanted to become a B Corp. B Corp accreditation sort of validated how we were operating as business in the first place.
My guest today is Joanna Allen, who is CEO at Graze, the UK's leading healthy snacking brand. I'm Mark Graze from PKF Francis Clark, and I'll be your host. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to get updates and notifications as to when our latest episodes are available. Hi Joanna, how are you today?
Really well, thank you, Mark.
Good. For our listeners, could you just give a little bit of background on what Graze is?
Absolutely. So, as you said, it's the UK's leading healthy snacking business. It started back in 2008 as a subscription-only business at a time when it was really hard to find healthy snacks for anyone, particularly in a kind of working environment. And people will fondly remember getting their Graze snack box delivered through the post to their desk. The business has grown and evolved a lot since 2008. We are now a retail business as well as a direct consumer business. We became a very proud B Corp back in 2021, and we have started to grow the brand into more channels, into more categories, and into some more geographies since 2008. So it's been on a really exciting journey.
Well, that's really good. There's a lot of elements within there that I want to unpack with you at that stage. But let's just complete the puzzle. How did you first become involved?
So I joined Graze right at the very beginning of the pandemic. That feels almost like a lifetime ago. I became chief exec about 18 months after Graze had been acquired by Unilever. That's our new parent company. And I came in to lead the business at a time when none of us could meet face to face. So the first 7 months in my time in role, I wasn't able to meet my leadership team together. We had to do everything virtually, and it's been 3 years since then. So taking the business through a lot of transformation, continue to drive growth into the business. It's been a really exciting journey.
Okay, let's unpack that and use that timeline. Let's start in that 2008, because 2008 is famous in most people's minds as the financial crisis, which just shook all of the world's global markets at that stage. Where did Graze come from? Where did the original idea? I appreciate it's before your time, but how did it arrive?
So it was founded by a group of friends who had originally started Love Film. And for anyone who maybe doesn't remember, Love Film was almost like a precursor to Netflix as we know today. It was busy sending DVDs through the post. And the team who started Graze essentially took that same technology, that understanding of loyalty, of subscriptions, and thought about how they could apply it to a new area of business, a new sector, and we're all personally frustrated by the sort of poor quality of snacks that you could get at the time, and decided to go into the snacking business. And that, as they say, is kind of the rest is history. But I think it talks to actually how Graze was born, and the fact that technology and data is something that runs still very much in Graze's DNA. It was how it was sort of born at the beginning, and we consider it a competitive advantage still today.
Obviously, we're going back a long time, because it's not, you mentioned that pre-pandemic seeming a long time ago. Back in 2008, there wasn't the craze so much for healthiness, environment and that type of stuff. So it was obviously quite a bold move, and a move when the markets were against them at that stage. Was it a deliberate anti-move, a move against the markets?
I think it was recognising that there was a segment of the population who wanted better snacks. Because if you cast your mind back, at that time, it was really hard actually to find healthy snacks in the market. If you went into a corner shop, or if you thought about a vending machine, you probably had really limited choices. That's vastly different to today, right? You can find positively healthy snacks kind of almost within arm's reach of desire, wherever you may be. But at a time, it was serving, you could argue, a niche of a population, but a population who wanted to have a healthier choice in snacking. And it was incredibly disruptive, to get snacks through the post through an e-commerce platform back in 2008 was a radical kind of proposition. And, the business took time to grow and to mature. It's when you look at the historical growth trajectory of the business, it wasn't an immediate success. It didn't become a unicorn business overnight. It definitely took time to establish itself. But I think what's amazing is that we still have subscribers from those very early days subscribing to our business still. And I think that's testament to the fact that we do serve quite a unique need in the market.
Exploiting that niche. As someone who ate out of garages on a fairly regular basis in the 2000s and 2010s, thank you, because I can appreciate the fact that there now is fruit and that type of stuff as an alternative, as opposed to just crisps and Mars bars and that type of stuff. So it grew then. It did a transaction in the early 2010s with a fairly big equity group. Mm-hmm. How did that work?
So again, before my time, but the equity investment was taken on to enable the business to expand in two critical areas. One was to expand our manufacturing capability into the UK. So it was quite a crucial enabler to ultimately the retail expansion that we took the business on in 2015. But it also was an enabler to Graze's first international expansion, which was to the US. And so that equity investment enabled the business to take a stab at the US market, which is obviously sizable. It's not a market that Graze is in today, but at its time, early stages of subscription or digital commerce businesses, Graze definitely had subscribers in every state in the US, and that equity investment was important to being able to unlock that opportunity.
And that brings us sort of to where you started in sort of 2019 with the Unilever acquisition. How did that come? What was Unilever looking for?
So Unilever saw within the Graze business two critical things that it chose to acquire us on the basis of. One was that we were operating and continue to operate in a higher growth segment than sometimes their core business does. And often they'll look at acquisitions on the basis of revenue growth accelerators to their core business, which tends to be much more mature. And healthy snacking is growing faster than the total snacking market and continues to be an accelerant, for the food industry as a whole, and is still relatively small when you look at the size of the total snacking industry. And Unilever definitely recognized our competency around data and wanted through the acquisition to make sure that they were kind of upskilling both on that direct consumer capability, but also in terms of how we utilize data to drive either efficiency in our market, to drive a competitive advantage of how we work with our customers. That was an asset that Unilever saw as something that they wanted to acquire Graze for.
That's fascinating, because you look at Graze, data wouldn't be the thing that leaps to mind as a valuable asset within it. I want to talk about Unilever and how you manage that relationship now on the basis Unilever's got an awful lot of big brands located in just about every territory in the world. How do you manage the relationship between a business that wants to promote a really, really strong independent brand that's separate from those other brands, when you are actually at the back and call it your masters, shall we say? I think you said mothership before. How do you manage that tension?
So I give Unilever a lot of credit, actually. They enable us to operate very autonomously, but they are also there when we need them. And I think actually that is a testament to how they support their acquired businesses. And I can think of some very tangible examples of where that has added value to the Graze business. One was, as we were going through the pandemic, Unilever had great knowledge of how to deliver manufacturing in a COVID-safe way. And actually, we took that playbook, said thank you very much, and went and deployed it in our manufacturing operation. That was capability and knowledge from a medical perspective that we would never have had we stayed as our own organization. And I feel very proud of the fact that, we had employees at Graze in our manufacturing operation through the pandemic who were saying actually they felt safer at work than they felt anywhere else. And that for me was a real delight, because it showed that we were really looking after our people. So, credit to Unilever on that front. They have also really supported us on things like cybersecurity, because they have, again, fantastic competency. They partner with a lot of the acquired businesses to do a full kind of cybersecurity audit. And that helps us then as we think about kind of action plans, making sure that we make sure the business is on really strong foundations in that respect. And then we utilize the commercial relationship relationships that they have, particularly with some of the grocers, to make sure that we are not just realizing our opportunity as we stand as Graze, as an independent business working with those retailers, but how do we form part of, for example, a joint business plan with a customer. And that's where, again, we leverage that relationship. So it's actually often it's a question that I get asked of how does that relationship work between Graze and Unilever. It's been one that I have been delighted by over the 3 years that I've been in role. They really have enabled us to take the best of being part of the family.
And how much freedom do you get from the brand side of things in promoting Graze the brand?
Yeah, very much so. For example, we generate still all of our own creative. We have an in-house creative team. So that is very much kind of our part of the business to run. We became a B Corp once we had become acquired by Unilever. And again, I think that's credit to them. They've supported us doing that, even though the core of Unilever is not at that stage. And so I think they recognize that, again, Graze is a brand. That's part of what they acquired, right? Was the brand itself. It's a very strong brand. It is, as I said, the leading healthy snacking brand in the country. And again, they might support us in terms of, making sure that we've got access to the best trends, but we run the business and the brand relatively autonomously.
I did find that fascinating. The B Corp came after the acquisition by Unilever. Who was driving the B Corp side of things?
Yeah, so we had actually started the process before we were acquired, and then anyone who's gone through B Corp accreditation will know that is a process that takes time. It is not a fast process. And so we completed that process post-acquisition. And it was driven by a number of really passionate individuals within the business who wanted that external recognition of what we were doing as a business anyway. And I think that's what's really powerful about B Corp. We didn't change what Graze was doing because we wanted to become a B Corp. B Corp accreditation sort of validated how we were operating as business in the first place. And I think that's where it's really powerful, right? It's acknowledging the fact that we are out there to provide more nutritious, more tasty snacks in a world where there's a lot of crap out there, frankly. And so that was the biggest driver of our accreditation. But I think with any business which becomes a B Corp, they, as I said, appreciate the rigor that goes with that certification process. And you need a couple of individuals within your business. We have a number who are real passionate advocates for making that certification happen.
We've had a few guests who are B Corp certified. We've had one guest who provides that B Corp certification to talk through. I think one of the things that has come out is that it's almost a shock. People might think, B Corp would be good. B Corp would be good for marketing. They then look at it and an awful lot then stop on the basis of, well, wait a minute. That's a 2-year journey. That's a 3-year journey. We've got to modify a lot of things. I think that's one of the good things out of it. It does tend to put off the people who either are not aligned or are not willing to put the effort in.
Yeah, so again, for your listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, you need 80 points to secure your accreditation as a B Corp. The kind of average company, the first time they go through that assessment, score around 50. So I think it shows you actually that becoming a B Corp or being a B Corp, you are really at the kind of pinnacle of being a purpose-driven business. And then the fact that you have to certify or recertify every 3 years drives that agenda of continuous improvement, and the standards get harder, right? You can't stand still as a B Corp, but I think that's really positive.
But come explore that underlying theme there, because I know you're passionate about business purpose. And we've talked to some of our few previous guests on that topic about how there's a lot of things about strategy, about mission and values and all that type of stuff. But bluntly, that core purpose of which everyone agrees on and can clearly state tends to trump everything. It tends to drive a culture which puts strategy plans in through the shredder if you've got purpose right. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I'll share a perspective. I also consider myself a bit of a strategist at heart, so I always feel nervous when people talk about strategy going through a shredder. But if I put that to the side, I'm actually a very commercial leader who believes in purpose. And sometimes people can find that as a bit of a conundrum. And the reason why I say that is if we as businesses help solve consumer problems, then there is money to be made. There is a commercial opportunity there. And actually, if that can be done in a way that is positive for the person, that is positive for the community, positive for the environment, then that has to be a better way of doing business. But it fundamentally starts with, are you solving a human problem? And therefore there is revenue to be generated from that. And I have no issue with talking about the fact that, we talk about a triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit. And it has to be all three. It shouldn't be that we operate as a business which is just here to do good for planet, or conversely, just here to do good for profit. I don't think either of those models are sustainable in the long term for business. But what's powerful is when you find a business that can do all three.
That trade-off, you're effectively talking about short-term versus medium-stroke long-term there, because there's always the short-term trade-off of doing something which helps profits in that short term.
I would challenge that. We undertook quite a significant packaging change earlier this year. That packaging change is better for people because it protects our products for longer. It gives us better standout on shelf. That packaging material is more recyclable and it has a lower cost to us. So that for me is the perfect example actually of, triple bottom line really happening in one project, happening at pace. I don't think the trade-off of profit short-term, purpose long-term I think it's outdated.
It's one of the ones that has been through the cycle, through you talked about strategy, all the strategy experts over the last sort of 40 or 50 years, there's always been that cycle of what are the directors there to do? Who are they to serve at that moment? And we went through in the 70s or 80s, there was a movement about that wider background, that wider environment, etc. The 80s/90s got a bit more confused with the Wall Street greed, which was therefore you are there for your shareholders, boys and girls. That's all you've got to do. We've now come around to the other side of that in a much more stated way, a much more realistic way on that side. But it is quite hard, especially you have Unilever behind you at that stage. If you're an average SME living on banks' borrowings, etc., that can be a real challenge for them at that stage. How would you encourage them to be looking at it?
Without a doubt, a challenge. And I think, many businesses, whilst we have a large parent, we are an SME business in many respects, we're faced with massive shifts in some of our input costs over the last kind of 18 months. And that has demanded of all of us in the business to really look at where do we put investment, investment of our people, investment in media, for example. And we've had to make some tougher short-term choices, I would say. But I also believe that it has made us more efficient as a business, and that's positive for the long term. So whilst it has been driven by an inflection point on kind of the supply chain crisis and the energy crisis as we were confronted by, I think it has helped us build a better business, which should be benefits that then we sustain going forward.
I come back to the intro at that stage, that phrase healthy snacking brand. Sometimes you can get, and we might disagree on strategy documents, which are 20 pages long, and that if you can do a purpose in 3 words or 4 words or 5 words that really encapsulates it and everyone believes in, that kind of cuts through all the paperwork, should we say, at that stage.
Absolutely. I don't think strategy needs to be long and drawn out by any means. Our mission as a business is to challenge the convention that snacks can't be good for you and tasty. It's not complicated, but it's incredibly easy actually to understand. But it's our point of difference in the market, and it's what I know makes a lot of people at Graze kind of get excited about the challenge that we have ahead.
I suppose you're tying everyone together at that one. There's a previous podcast whose phrase was helping people do amazing things. And it kind of everyone tied into that purpose. And that made it far easier when you had to make difficult decisions, or far easier to have everyone facing in roughly the same way. Let's stick on that for a little bit, because you're an advocate. You're involved with the Better Business Act movement. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So the Better Business Act is supported by a coalition of businesses across a really broad spectrum of very small SMEs that frankly make up a lot of the lifeblood of UK industry, to high street brands, retailers, brands like Graze. And that coalition is advocating for a change in company law to a very specific section, Section 172, which argues today that a director's responsibility as a company director, that their duty is to provide shareholder return ahead of all other aspects of managing the business. And we believe that's outdated. As a coalition, we believe that there should be change to company law to recognise that company directors in today's business environment should be considerate of the the impact that they are generating to profit, but alongside the impact that they are creating to community and to environment. And that actually by holding a company director to only their fiduciary duty in return to shareholders, that is an outdated view of the world.
It's outdated, but it's very common on the legal side. An awful lot of business systems are based on the company. And also, I should say, congratulations. Well done. You're the first one that's ever mentioned a specific section of the Companies Act. So a first for the podcast at that stage. How much traction can we get there? The government's so bogged down in so many different things at the moment. How much attention can you get for that?
We've had really good cross-party engagement on this, done a number of days at Westminster. I've spoken at a select committee. And so in that respect, we believe that there is traction, and you're seeing the volume of businesses that are supporting the Better Business Act. And my one ask would be to your listeners, if you haven't signed up, please go to the Better Business Act and sign up and join the coalition to voice your support for it. So cross-party support, I think in terms of the actual translation of that into legislative change, it may manifest in a different way. And as a coalition, I don't think we're precious in terms of how it truly manifests. The Section 172 change is a relatively simple change to enact, but it may be that it manifests in a different way. But it is with that belief that actually this is an opportunity for British business to be on the forefront of kind of the future of how business should be done. You're starting to see traction of this kind across different markets. So there are a number of states in the US where there is legislation that is sort of going in this direction. I think it is unrealistic to expect all businesses can achieve a B Corp status, but with this, we could shift it. And I think you're still seeing investment, and the investment communities are supporting businesses and investment funds which are going into ESG. Now, a lot of debate around greenwashing, around standards, which I would welcome in many respects. I don't think any of us want to be part of a movement which is not truly authentic in terms of what it's trying to accomplish. There is a lot to be said actually around a consistent set of standards for how we measure ESG, which we are not there today. But I guess that spirit of, can we be at the forefront in British industry of attracting investment? We know it also attracts great talent, and being on the forefront of kind of the future of business, I think, is an exciting part of a coalition to be part of.
I come back a little to that purpose. I come back to that multifaceted angle of it. You talked briefly about attracting employees.
Mm-hmm.
That type of stuff ties into purpose. And then as large as FDI, investment from other countries coming in where they see good things happening over here, which is something we are in desperate need of at the moment. So I want to come back to something you said earlier about coming in the early 2020, where you had to come into a virtual environment because of the pandemic. You came in just shortly after the Unilever acquisition. How do you do that? How do you adapt a working style to take over as CEO when you're still trying to work out how Teams works and all that type of stuff? How does that work? How did you do that?
So I think firstly, it's a testament to Graze's culture. They are as a business incredibly welcoming to individuals coming in. It has an amazing spirit. I remember the early days of the pandemic, we were doing all of the crazy stuff that people were doing, yoga classes online. We had a weekly comedy show, quiz nights, like all of that was definitely alive and well in Graze's culture. And I think to some extent, the crisis that we were confronted by meant that I had all the permission I ever needed to be really choiceful over what were we going to go after. I think with a business like Graze, where there are so many opportunities, because there really are, actually being confronted by, very different channel dynamics and having the need to then make some very specific priorities in terms of where we were going to put our bets as a business, and particularly in the short term. The pandemic was demanding that of me and the leadership team, whether we wanted that or not. So that, I think, culture, the fact that actually the pandemic created the right environment to be ruthless on our priorities. And I really believe my background, having been in businesses where they had multi-channel routes to market and understanding the different dynamics of those, and having the really close proximity to what consumers need. That's one of the benefits of having a subscription business. We have a real live feed on how people are feeling about the business. That's a sort of consumer intimacy meant that it was an easier task than maybe others may have found it. It was a true delight. It's a great business, and I've really enjoyed leading it.
For our listeners who obviously can't see us because they're listening at that stage, I would note that you've been smiling as you've been talking about Graze throughout the last half hour that we've been actually chatting about it. It's easy to tell that you're really passionate about it. Can I just, on that, if you were to look back in, say, 5 years' time on your time at Graze, not saying it'll only be 5 years, but look back in 5 years, what would you want to see as your impact on Graze?
So I talk about Graze being a business that when I joined was a sort of gangly teenager, and I'm aiming to make into a slightly more mature 20-something. What does that mean? So we are clearer in terms of our brand and commercial priorities than I believe we were when I came in. We have done an enormous amount of transformation of our operations through my time, and we continue to do that. As we mature the business, as we continue to make improvements in terms of safety, the quality of our operations, our financial control systems, those are things that are important so that as the business matures, as it becomes more scaled, that those foundations are really solid. And that as a business, we have continued to keep purpose at our heart, despite the changing dynamics externally, a changing ownership model. We are currently going through our recertification stage on B Corp, and I'm keeping fingers crossed and confident that we will recertify with a higher score than we certified with originally. So those are the three things that, as I look back on my time, I will be delighted by.
Ideal of that. I do want to get something else in here. You're a member of CHIEF, the Women's Private Executive Network, also a member of DIAL, the diversity review side of things. There's a lot of lip service that gets paid to this. How do you see that as coming of age? Because there is more of a flavour of it in today's boardroom. How do you see that coming of age?
Yeah, it's something I've reflected on. I think you have those threads through your life that you don't necessarily realise until you're a little bit older. So I'll talk about one of my threads. Mine has been that I have always appreciated and valued diverse perspectives in the room. I've genuinely always felt like it's made my brain better and the strategy work that I do more strong. And as I said, it's one of those threads that it's only sort of now that you realise that thread has existed. But actually, I go back almost to when I was at university. I went to London School of Economics, and about half of the population base at that time was international. And I was surrounded by people who had had totally different life experiences to the experience that I had had. And I relished that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. If I then fast forward, I had the opportunity when I was working at Coca-Cola in the UK to go out and I relocated to Atlanta to work in the global team. And again, I was amazed. I felt like I'd worked at Coke for 7 years. I thought I knew that business inside out. And then all of a sudden I was meeting teams who were from the Philippines or from Mexico or from Japan. And all of a sudden realized actually how diverse that business was and how much I could learn through those experiences. And then that has just continued. So I am selfishly invested in driving diversity within my leadership team, driving it within UK business. That's why I support things like the DIAL review, because I fundamentally think personally it makes my brain better, and I think it makes the work of business leaders better as well.
I think there is an old quote, possibly a Mark Twain quote, I'm trying to remember how that says, which is roughly travel is the cure for ignorance. Actually seeing things. Have you been to Japan?
I haven't had the opportunity. I was due to go out actually when the tsunami hit, and we called it. We said we wouldn't go out. It was a business trip. We didn't want to distract the local team. So I've never had the opportunity to.
I just encourage all of our listeners to actually go to a culture which is so alien to the UK. And if I had my way, I'd get through all teenagers going out there at that stage to actually work out that English doesn't solve anything when the locals don't understand it at that stage. But just as you say, gave you that there are alternative perspectives which are equally as valid as yours. And
Absolutely.
getting that around the board table is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and if I look at the leadership team that I've curated, nurtured around me at Graze, I've got individuals who have had a long tenure at Graze. I've had individuals that I've brought into the business who have got experience of Unilever, who particularly in the supply chain of side of things, I wanted that capability. I've brought in teams who have had far more recent experiences of being in startup and scale up businesses, because I appreciate actually that we each then bring a different perspective that means that the Graze business is stronger as a result of it.
Very good. That's it. Last couple of things, because we're running out of time. Could you just give us a quick description of the other CEO, the Chief Eating Officer?
The Chief Eating Officer was a creative asset that we came up with 2 years ago at Graze. It was a much loved squirrel, and she definitely had a big heart for our Graze snacks. So yeah, there was a moment at which I thought I was going to be surpassed by a red squirrel, but thankfully I've stuck around longer.
Okay, and I've got to ask what your favourite Graze product is.
So this is well known, certainly within the Graze team. My favourite product is a punnet that we make called Graze Dark Choc Cherry Tart. It's thoroughly delicious.
And it's healthy?
And it's healthy. It's made up of cherries, beautiful dark chocolate button, which is very low in sugar, and pecans, which are very good from a fibre perspective. So yeah, very, very yummy and good for you too.
Excellent. I'll try and find that on the website once we've finished on this side of things. Thank you so much, Joanna, for joining us today, sharing your story. Some really good stuff in there, especially about that underlying theme of purpose, which seems to run through quite a lot of it, which I'd want to encourage our business listeners just to really think about what is the purpose of being. And thank you to our audience for listening to our latest episode of Business Noodles and Doodles. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to get updates and notifications of when our latest episodes are available.